everyone, welcome back to Build. I'm your host, Brittany Jones Cooper, and today I'm sitting down with author and activist Jodie Patterson. Her new book, The Bold World, chronicles her personal journey of reshaping her attitudes and beliefs, as well as those of her community, to meet the needs of her transgender son, Penelope. Please help me welcome Jodie Patterson.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm really good. Look at this.
I was gonna say, have you seen the book cover this large?
I mean, you know, the one thing that people warned me about, they said, it's always difficult when you work with publishers on your book cover. And so I had this nervousness around how the visuals would come out, and I love it. Yeah. They were so fantastic. They listened to every little nuance of what I wanted to bring forward, which was life and color and vivid, but also transformation. And so like seeing it here, I love it.
And it will definitely pop off the shelves as people are walking by too.
Like 3-second rule?
Yeah, grab your attention and bring people in, which is so important because the story you tell, I think, is going to touch so many people. I've seen you on social media in your activism for raising awareness for the transgender community, but I love that the book really starts with you and your background. So why was that important for you to tell your story first to sort of set that tone?
There were many places where I kept being asked to focus on in the media. And when I sat down to actually write the book, I was really clear at that point. Because this has been, since Penelope was 3 and Penelope's now 11. So I've had lots of years to sit on this. And I realized that the story of Penelope doesn't start the moment he said, I'm trans, the moment he said, I'm a boy, the moment he showed signs of distress. The story is a historical story, and I wanted to tell my story, really. I didn't want to tell my son's. Maybe he'll write his own book one day. And so I was asked a question that will never leave my mind, and that question was, who raised you? Mm-hmm. Who raised you to be the woman, the mama who was able to help and to stand up in that moment? So I went way back. Yeah. I went, back down south, where my family's from, back multiple generations, and I really looked at the men and the women who raised me. So I have my grandmother, Dr. Gloria Blackwell. She was a civil rights activist, jailed dozens of times. She fought against school boards and hospitals and won in the segregated South. My father, John Patterson, started the first black brokerage firm on Wall Street. My mother, Jamel, and her sister, Lerma Rackley, they marched before they were even out of high school, jailed. My uncle, Gil Scott-Heron, wrote The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, a singer. So I had to really sit down and look at the revolutionaries in my family, the activists. And that's when I started thinking, well, Penelope's not like this poor kid or this different, sad child. He's actually a revolutionary. And so I put Penelope in context, I put the gender revolution in context, and then I was able to kind of give myself a little bit of that as well. So I'm a mother who stands up for something. So I needed to tell the full story. I couldn't just start on the day Penelope confided in me.
And I loved how you really go through and you point all of the very strong women in your family and how that informed you of what a woman should be or is. And I thought that was so important because when Penelope came to you and said, I'm a boy, you really had to go through some of that past stuff that you kind of thought and face like this new reality for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I was raised by a lot of women, and I was raised with a feminist perspective. Yeah. And so I was raising my children that way, especially my girls. And I thought, here's Penelope. Penelope's going to be this amazing, witty, smart, feisty girl. And there was nothing was kind of playing out the way I thought. Mm-hmm. When Penelope said, Mama, I'm a boy, I thought I'd failed to raise a feminist. Mm-hmm. I really went into this place of guilt and shame around not telling the stories of Billie Jean King and Nina Simone and Shirley Chisholm. I thought, oh my gosh, I've forgotten to raise this child to be proud. Mm-hmm. So for a while I was defending feminism, for a while I was trying to fix the problem, for a while I was really trying to get Penelope back on track, mm-hmm. Right? And I kept pushing for this girl to be happy, to be proud. And the more I did that, the worse Penelope was. It was like the counter opposite happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's something I didn't realize, that even at such a young age, he was so confident in his identity, and that was the reason for a lot of the tantrums and a lot of the kind of just frustration. I didn't actually understand that the children could act out like that because they weren't really being heard.
So many people think Penelope is too young, or Penelope was too young to really know And they say, well, how could he know, and how could you do that to him? As if I'm doing something. But really, so there's like some science to it and then some lived experience. Scientifically, the brain identifies at around 3. So all of us, every human, trans or cis or any form of human life, we all have our brain starting to place ourselves in the world at around 3. And then it happens several other times in our lives. So biologically with Penelope was right on track. Penelope was really verbal, really exceptionally verbal. He was able to say, I am a boy. And then I thought, oh, well, maybe she's a lesbian. Right. And so I thought, well, if you feel like a boy and you want to act like your brothers, go ahead, baby. Go ahead, do it. Because I thought, maybe here's a girl who sees how the world works in favor of men, and she wants to be tough. So I said, if you feel like a boy, go for it, act like a boy. And then Penelope really quickly said, no, Mama, I don't feel like a boy. I am a boy. Big difference.
It's a huge difference. And I think it's important, again, for people to read that and understand that when a child speaks, you have to listen and maybe not interpret it into something that makes you feel comfortable. That was the biggest kind of lesson I took away, not being a parent, and that when I do have kids, is that listening seems to be hard, but important.
Exactly. Most of the time we know the story, or at least we think we know, right? We have done it before or experienced a kid who's temperamental. And a lot of, Penelope's ways in the beginning, I thought, okay, here's just a kid who's difficult. Yeah. So we changed bedtime. We gave more hugs. We gave longer naps. We took out dairy. We thought maybe it's a dairy allergy. Everything that as a parent you can think of, because here's a kid who's just most of the time miserable. Yeah. And so, you're in your parent brain, you're thinking, what did my parents do for me, and what do I know that can sort of environmentally change? And we did 2 years of that, and nothing changed. In fact, there were reoccurring nightmares every night, biting his nails until they were bloody. Bullying. He was pushing his brothers. He was pushing kids on the playground. Most interactions were protest, like no to brushing hair, no to getting dressed, no to the butterfly pull-ups, no to the pink toothbrushes. I think his first word, Penelope's first word was no, just protest. And so you see a kid trying now, with hindsight and with experience after speaking to other parents of trans kids are communicating before words come out. Yeah. So everything was Penelope trying to tell us, the way you see me is not the way I see myself.
And in the book, you go from first person to a certain point going to second person.
Do I really?
when you're getting into the day-to-day with Penelope and sort of those struggles, and then he comes to you. Did you do that on purpose? Because you went from I to you wake up in the morning and you have to do this. Was that intentional?
That chapter was, I wanted it to, I wrote a lot in my journal. Yeah. So a lot of what you see in the book comes from my journal entries over the years. From just right out of college all the way up. But those particular months when I was really dealing with Penelope, they were I have 5 children, and I was on my second husband, and I had a business, and it was every day was okay, get up, okay, kids up, okay, breakfast, okay, shower, bath. We were on such a schedule, and so I was writing that chapter with that energy, and I wanted the reader to really be there with me, because it was a struggle, really, just to get out the door. So a lot of the decisions we were making were efficiency decisions, which is what most parents are doing all day long. How do I efficiently get my kids to school and myself to job? And so, the chapter, I went back and forth in my mind whether or not the reader would appreciate that, but at a certain point, it was mostly feeling. That was how that chapter needed to feel.
And you mentioned all the things you were dealing with, and in the book, you talk about being taught to nurture your roots, and you kind of look back at the women in your family and how they dealt with stress, whether it was your mom using meditation. What did you do? What do you do self-care-wise, just to make sure that you can be there and present for your children? Because this did sound like a particularly tough time.
Yes, it was tough, and I probably at the time wasn't doing enough. I mean, now I have a completely different method. At the time, I was using my phone and my calendar announcements as self-care. I was well, someone will take care of me. My phone will take care of me. It'll tell me where I have to be and what time I have to do things. And I felt, my body was falling apart. I I had miscarriages. I had, my husband and I were arguing all the time. My patience was like this tight. I wasn't sleeping. And I had to remember what my mom was doing. I had forgotten a lot of things, right? As when you get to your 30s, you forget your 12-year-olds self. And my mom used to make us meditate, and my grandmother used to make us brush our hair 100 times at night. And that whole process of like brushing and nurturing from the root to the tip was clearly not just about hair. She was telling me, you have to go slow, you have to have purpose, and you have to grow things and raise things over time. So fast forward now, at almost 50, I take about an hour in the morning for myself. So after I drop the kids, I run Brooklyn streets, mostly to Drake, and stretch.
Yeah.
It sounds cliche. Oh, and I jade roll. You know the jade roller that everybody's using on his. It makes me feel really relaxed. Yeah, you got to do these things.
Yeah, you have to. I think
Pick
that
your choice.
ritual. Yeah, having that ritual of something that's for you is so important. I can imagine even more so when you have 5 children.
And they don't, always want to hear that what you're doing is for you, right? Your kids are always like, but what about me? And you have to, just as much as I had to, I really basically stopped the world for Penelope. It was that critical. And there are about 40 minutes when my kids are home at night. At 9 o'clock, I stop. I'm like, that is it. It's 9 o'clock, you do your thing, I do mine. It's essential.
I know you said you journaled a lot, but in choosing what to put in the book and what to leave out, were there any times that were just particularly hard to go back to and write about?
Writing the book was difficult. I start when I'm a kid, and it goes all the way up through high school, college, marriage 1, divorce, marriage 2, divorce. So there's a lot of loss and gain throughout the book. The times that were hard were the relationships, the lost relationships with the adults. I didn't lose any kids in this process. I gained more love. But I did, the relationships that I was in, were tough. I was younger. I didn't have as much knowledge and skill. And they were also the world. My second marriage, the world felt like it was on our shoulders. So attention is finite, right? Time during the day is finite. All of the time went for Penelope and the kids. Yeah. Less of it went for the relationship. And so when I was writing about, so I couldn't just write about the end result. I had to write about the good stuff and then leading up to the bad. So I had to go all the way back to the good, which, it's a little counterproductive because you're now divorced. So to relive all the good, it's like, oh, where did that take me?
Right. But it was also beautiful, and I think it helped me understand you and how you're able to lead with love with your son, because you've had these loves in the past that you had to work for and work through and overcome. And, so I think it is important to tell that part of it as well. Totally. You mentioned the challenges, but also you guys have had a lot of things to celebrate as well. So what is that like, just getting to look back in those moments where you felt like you crossed over, or he was finally feeling seen or accepted or loved by other communities?
So many great moments that I almost forget that they're bad things. I mean, someone will remind me, oh, you've been married twice, which means you've divorced twice. And I'm like, oh yeah, we did have that bump in the road. But generally speaking, it feels triumphant. So Penelope, I remember the first day at school wearing a tie and pants. They wear uniforms. And so Penelope's always sort of dressed boyish, but the day that we said fully boy, not the girl tie, but the boy tie, the boy haircut. I just remember Penelope walking up the stairs to school, friends high-fiving Penelope, Penelope walking in just so proud. My dad used to tell me, you got to walk in like you own the joint, because you do. He says, every place in this world belongs to you or belongs with you. And so when Penelope walked into school that day, just prideful, it made me feel like we had done something right. Also, when he won a karate tournament, which he just went back. I mean, every year he goes and he fights, and every year he fights in the boy division. When you're 5 and 6, everybody's a shorty. He's in the 10 to 13-year-old group of boys. Penel's a short dude. The 13-year-old kids, they look like you and me. And so, my heart drops, my stomach tenses. He gets punched, he gets hit in the face, he gets knocked down. This year he took third in sparring. So those are my proud moments. And they call his name Penelope Garte. And he stands up and he receives the medal, and I'm like, it couldn't be.
And you go into it a little bit in the book, but what was that thought process to not change his name?
It wasn't my idea, it was his. So at a certain point, we were kind of shortening. There were some times just out of safety, we would shorten his name, like when we were crossing borders and we were going into new territory, just to lessen the attention. Because Penel's always usually in shorts and a mohawk and sneakers, so saying Penelope makes people kind of stop and turn. First tournament, karate tournament, we're in the car, and I asked a really naive question. I said, hey, babe, do you want to change your name to something more boyish? And he looked at me and he said, why? And I said, well, so people can understand it more. And he said, well, I love my name. I was named after my grandmother, Penelope, so I'm good with it. But if other people feel uncomfortable, maybe they want to call me Jack. And then he winked. So he's playing with me, which made me understand to him the name is not about gender, it's just about love and family. So his name is Penelope Garte. Yeah.
And the communication part is something that you're obviously very good at. But you also talk about even in your own family having to have these open conversations and people not being fully on board or understanding. And you, at the end, call them the lab, where you sit with the kids and they can ask any question and you can have an open dialogue. How important has that been for your family? And do you hope that that's something more families start to do?
It's something that that I was forced to do. So in that, once I understood Penelope to be trans, I wanted everyone to come along. And I thought everyone in the family would just be like, oh, that's cool. Didn't happen that way, of course. And even in my home, in my immediate family, I have children with different ethnicities and different perspectives. So I have one kid who's 13, he's smart as a whip. Scientifically, he doesn't understand transgender. He says, look, it's not scientifically proven. I need to speak in science terms. And biologically speaking, Penelope is, physically speaking, female. It's a physically female body. And so then Penelope says, I'm not science. I'm just like the way God made me. And it's not an opinion, it's just the way And then Cassius, the science kid, says, well, God isn't proven either. So you've lost me on trans, you've lost me on faith. So we have this thing. When I realized that my kids they have different ideas, different truths, you cannot force anyone, right? If I were to force Cassius, he would rebel. If I made him believe, which you can't, it wouldn't have worked in my favor. So what we do now is we call it the lab. I call it the lab, subversively. We all sit down. And any argument we have, whether it's who gets the front seat, whether it's religion, faith, gender, we talk it out. So rules are everyone gets the microphone. You can speak as long as you have the microphone. If it's 10 minutes, you can't interrupt, and you can't react. You have to speak your thing. So of course it's super hard not to react. Because here's a kid saying it's not scientifically proven, but it basically they talk it out back and forth, and they talk so long that after about 30 minutes, all they want to do is play. So I win because what we need to do. The idea is that if you can discuss, debate, and disagree without getting rattled, then we're better off. So Cassius and Penelope may still be on the ends of the spectrum in terms of their belief system. But they eat together, they share bathroom together, they go on school trips and class and activities together. So if this is what we could do in the world, imagine.
That's right? Exactly what I thought. I would go, this is so productive.
Yeah.
And it teaches you how to debate fairly. Mm-hmm. And whoa, if we could do that as a nation, that would be amazing. My son, I asked him the other day, would you have voted? How would you have voted? The science guy. He's like, I wouldn't need all the facts. Perhaps I would have voted for, in my own family, it is such a broad display of opinion. And you never think, the way the media talks about it, you think that there are good people and there are bad people. But really, you can't simplify it down to that. The idea is to get to a yes, right? And not yes on necessarily facts, but the yes in terms of, can we sit down together? Can we eat? Can we use bathrooms? Can we share public life together? And that's
what I try to demonstrate in our house. And so I know that wherever they are in their opinions and in their truths, they will have spent 20 years living together.
That's so important.
Better kids, yeah.
Before we go to questions, I want to point out that you've had some really amazing endorsements for this book. First of
know.
all, Alice Walker, just little known author, Alice Walker.
When it came through, I was screaming. Alice
Yeah,
Walker, Color
unbelievable. Also, Janet Mock,
Mm-hmm.
who we know has been a trailblazer. So, in what ways has Janet Mock influenced your activism and how you're raising Penel?
I used to work in the beauty industry, and I scored an interview with Janet Mock. So I had a beauty site, and I did a lot of conversations with women like Kerry Washington, and Janet Mock, Iman, and Zach Posen, just people that I thought were interesting, asking them questions about their life. And so I spoke with Janet for about half an hour, and I came out of that interview thinking that there's a woman who I would love my kids to model after. Strong, bold, beautiful, kind, funny, witty, helpful, team player, and undefinable in many ways, right? You can't just pinpoint Janet. She's not gonna let you do that. And so fast forward, when I sit down to write my book, I share a lot with Janet off and on throughout the process. She's come over, she's met my kids, and she just really made me feel like I don't have to be perfect in my activism. I make mistakes all the time around language, and she's let me slip up. And I think that's an important part, because as a mom, cisgender, I felt for a long time incapable of fully being in the conversations. However, my kid is in that conversation, so I have to be there. And so folks like Janet and Teak Milan, they helped me build up my confidence. And that's what you need to be an activist. You need confidence in and belief in what you stand for.
You've been doing an amazing job, and this book, I think, is just a continuation of that. So I'm hoping that people pick it up and take the time to read it. We do have some questions.
Yes.
So let's go to Twitter first. Taylor wants to know, hey, Jodie, how do you write a book about a loved one without overstepping their privacy?
Good question, and I really thought about that for a long time. There are a lot of loved ones in this book. So my children, 5 of them, husbands, 2 of them, family members alive and not alive. And there were things that I pulled. There were things that I thought I wanted to write about at the beginning, when I thought this was about navigating as a parent. But when I started to tell my story, the privacy issues around other people's spaces became less important, because I was really talking about myself. So I was conscious about telling my story and my vulnerabilities and my mistakes. And with Penelope, I asked permission. So I asked, is it okay to talk about this? Is it okay to use your name? With my ex-husbands, I also said, would you like to read the copy before I submit it to my editor? So it is almost impossible not to talk about the people and the circumstances around you when you're giving a full story of your life. So you will see real characters. And I have never wanted to invade on their own spaces. So it was a 3-year process of pulling things and putting them back in. There are places that I just did not, pieces that were really important for me to get off my chest, but they're still in my journal right now. They're not in the book. Yeah.
I do think you towed that line perfectly. I had that same question.
Good.
And you're like, there's definitely respect and love there, and you can tell. So even if you're talking about a moment that was particularly challenging, you can tell that it was 2 people who loved each other.
Yeah, and I did this thing where I kept photographs of everyone that I was talking about around me when I was writing, so that the top line memories were always really love-filled and joyous and sexy in terms of my husbands.
Exactly. Yeah. And who do we have in the audience with a question? Right there?
Hi.
So I'd love to know, were there any hiccups you experienced along the way writing this book, and how did you conquer them?
Writing a book, it was a first for me, just the whole process from the beginning to the end. So I really thought that writing was a solo experience. That was the impression I had of writers, just sort of sitting in a study by themselves and writing and writing and writing. For me, I did it differently. I had so many children and responsibilities, and things to do during the day, I needed a stabilizer. And so my editor became like my top person that I went to every day. We met with each other every week. I bounced ideas off of her. I think that the approach to writing that I took was probably the approach that I take in a lot of areas in my life: partnership, teamwork. I didn't just say, okay, I've got to do this and I'm not going to show it until I'm perfect. I used my team, I used my agent, I used my editor, I used the publishers, I used my mother and my aunt. So the hiccup was probably every other month I thought, I can't do it. I can't deliver what they want. I can't tell anymore. I don't even have any more story to tell. Every other month I thought I was done. And the way I got past that was relying on other people. I really learned in the process that the things you think are solo, much of them are not. But most of them have, teamwork and partnership involved. I think another hiccup was, and this goes back to our Twitter comment, trying to really narrow down what the point was. Because when you look at the backdrop right now, political backdrop, social backdrop, there's so much that is problematic with America. There's so much that is scary about people who are different, right? And the media and the frenzy keeps growing. So when I wrote this book, I didn't want to write from a place of fear. I didn't want to write from a place of confusion. And I definitely wasn't going to write about Penelope as the other person. Penelope's my son. So I had to really think about how to find the point. And the point to me, the bottom line to me, was life. Because at a certain point when my kid didn't want to live, and at the point when Penelope was so fragile, I thought the only thing that matters is life. So everything I would put in my journal and everything I would pin up on my wall was about love and life and love and life. How do I get there? It helped me really stay focused. And that process I use that process even when I'm not writing a book. What is the point? What is the bottom line? What are we trying to imitate? I'm imitating life. I'm not imitating the news. I'm not imitating bad manners. I'm not imitating fear. I'm imitating bold life. So that was hard, but it was a good lesson to learn that you have to really focus.
And last question.
Hi. I wanted to ask, what's like the one takeaway you want people to get away after reading the book?
Wow. So my book is for, after I get emotional about this, but it is really for the Black trans boy and the Black trans girl and the intersex person and the genderqueer kid. There's just not enough time spent with other people, with people. And when we spend more than 30 seconds, we actually find out that we are gay, we are intersex, we are trans, we are Black and Muslim, we are all of the things that we've called other. And so I hope that people open up their eyes to the things that they haven't seen, to the people they haven't seen. I want them to hear the voices that they haven't heard before. We all have these blind spots. And if we remove something, one lens, we can see a person who's always been there. And then we can stand together. So I write the book for the kid who doesn't feel like life is going his way. And I'm saying, I'm here, I'm a mother. There are moms that are here for you. I write it for a parent, a mother, anyone who cares for others that wants to be better. And I say, just stand up, stand up, stand with our kids. If one kid doesn't make it, we've failed. So I was looking at my family at dinner and I was like, am I supposed to tell Penelope that this America is not for him, but it's for his other brothers and sister? So I'm not gonna choose my kid one over the other. I'm not gonna say that there are two Americas, one for you and one for the rest of them. So I think that if this book helps to pull back the veil on America, discrimination, racism, sexism, genderism, then the book will have done a good job. I want us to live a little more boldly.
And I think once readers get to know Penelope,
He's undeniable.
He is undeniable and so lovable and so like all my nephews and all these little guys that I have in my life. And so, you know, I think they say you can't hate up close. And once you read this book, I think it's even harder to do.
Thank you.
So thank you for writing it. If you guys want to check out The Bold World, it's available now wherever books are sold. Give it up for Jodie Patterson.
Thank you so much.